Hey guys, and welcome to the Week 5 edition of the Fantasy Points UFL Breakdown. I'm your host, Jake Tribbey. I couldn't be happier to be back for Week 5, and I'm joined by my co-host, Millionaire Maker winner, and one of the greatest spring football DFS players ever, Neil Orfield. And as our YouTube viewers have likely noticed, we have a very special guest this week, Johnny Proctor from FantasyPoints.com. Proctor is a game theory maven, one of the best preseason DFS grinders of all time, and he's never afraid to tell me my takes absolutely suck. Johnny, how's it going? Happy to have you on the show, man.
Good, man. I'm excited that we have a spring football league that is not yet folded, and we'll hopefully make it to a championship week. And it seems like we're going to have year 2 of this, which is great.
Yeah. The TV viewership, quality of play has been really strong. So even though our DFS prize pools have been struggling a little bit, I do think this league is looking pretty good in terms of long-term viability. Neil, how are you doing after back-to-back second place finishes in the main GPP?
Yeah, I mean, last week wasn't nearly as painful, in part because it was 40% to second instead of 25% to second, but also like I held on for a long while, and I was pretty damn lucky to hold on for second place there. So it wasn't nearly as painful as getting beat out in like the last minute the week prior. But I'm feeling good. You can see I'm wearing my Vikings hat, feeling really good about how the Vikings draft went. And of course, happy to be to meet Johnny for the first time. Of course, we've known each other online for several years now, but good to finally get to see John Proctor face to face. So yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah. It's always great to bring people together who have only chatted online, and that's what this show's all about, helping Neil meet some new friends.
Exactly.
Yeah, this weird world that we all live in.
Yeah, exactly. Living online is certainly strange. Alrighty, guys. For those unaware, Fantasy Points has a UFL player projections, main slate ownership projections, an exclusive UFL DFS Discord channel where you can directly ask me, Neil, Chris Wecht, or Johnny questions about the slate, access to my UFL articles, which will be behind the paywall every other week. This week's is actually free. And I wanted to take a moment to emphasize the Discord. It's a great place to tilt or talk about the games. I'm basically in there 24/7 to answer questions and drop whatever juicy nuggets I have that can't make their way into our free content. It's probably the most underappreciated aspect of our UFL product. And we have both a free channel that's UFL General and a paywalled channel that's UFL DFS. So there really isn't any excuse not to hop in there. And subscribing is an even better deal for week 5. Promo code UFL 2024 now saves you 15% on our UFL subscription and our all access package, which is just an incredible value. Using promo code UFL 2024 brings the cost of our UFL package down to $10 a week for the rest of the UFL season. So definitely go check that out. Wanted to cut down on sort of pre-game discussion for this episode in the interest of time, and I really don't think there are any like significant macro takes that we need to touch on before we get into these games. So let's just dive right in. Our first game kicks off at Saturday at 7 p.m. We actually have 2 7 p.m. games again this week on Saturday. It's the San Antonio Brahmas at the Arlington Renegades. San Antonio is favored by 2.5. Total here is 42.5. I see a little bit of value on the under. I think this line's about right. Haven't bet anything here personally, but Johnny, I'll throw it over to you. Do you have any thoughts on this betting line?
I have preferred to bet these games like in game. I feel like the lines leading up to the games have been fairly reasonable since I think like week 1 and week 2, there were definitely some values. But what I have leaned on is the fact that I don't think DraftKings or FanDuel have really been taking into account that you have 1, 2, and 3 point conversions instead of just kicking like the automatic extra points. So it seems like teams who get an early lead move way too heavily, especially if it's the underdog. So I like betting the favorites. So that's kind of where I have leaned for my betting. So that's probably what I will do again.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty sharp take. I mean, we had kind of a similar discussion a few weeks back with Justin Freeman. It seems like, pretty much every, betting site for their live lines is just using their standard, NFL college football model. And it just really doesn't take into account the conversion differences and, the onside kicks as well. The 4th and 12, a lot more successful than a standard onside kick. Neil, any thoughts on this betting line before we get into DFS?
Yeah, I love that take. To start with, I would agree with that. If you're not making a ton of bets, maybe save your bets for those in-game lines when maybe you can take advantage of broken lines. I apologize. Which game are we talking about here? There are 2 games at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, We got San Antonio Brahmas at the Arlington Renegades.
You know exactly what I'm taking here. Give me the Brahmas all day long. And actually, I think I lean the over here. I think I lean Brahmas and I lean the over in this one.
Yeah, it's interesting because Arlington has had a few games where they have run just a ton of plays, but I mean, you can also, it's pretty easy to see this offense, really not doing well here. So I don't feel strongly, but I would slightly lean under, and obviously got to back the Brahmas as Neil said, but
definitely Brahmas. I as I'm thinking about it, the Brahmas are also missing like 3 offensive linemen. That kind of scares me a little bit. So maybe I don't want to lean too hard into. I'm just thinking the Brahmas. The offense is pretty good usually, in a good spot against Arlington. But yeah, I don't feel strongly about the over here. I think I feel more strongly about the Brahmas portion of it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Neil already noted, Brahma's offensive line is a little beat up. So some other injury notes. Anthony McFarland is out again due to the shoulder injury he suffered in week 3. So expect a healthy dose of John Lovett here. Cody Latimer popped up on the injury report with a hand issue, but he did practice in full on Thursday. He's listed as probable and is expected to play. So likely no change for Latimer's role there. Arlington's side is clean. So we'll start with the Brahmas here. I, feel pretty good about Quentin Dormady as a top 3 quarterback play on the week. That's pretty much where everyone has him. We all want to play these wide receivers. It's, just kind of tough to figure out when, it looks like Dormady's going to carry the most ownership of any quarterback this week. I imagine, the top tier will be him, McCarron, Adrian Martinez. So Johnny, I'll throw it over to you. What do you want to do with Dormady? And, I'd imagine all his pass catchers are going to be pretty popular. That's at least what we have, how we have things projected right now.
Yeah. So, just like looking at, aggregate projections on ownership, I think Kirkland obviously will just be, super popular again. Granted, he's getting more and more expensive. So, at some point, we're going to be wrong on the ownership projections where he'll just be harder to fit. But with the running back value, this probably won't be the week. So I think, obviously he would be your top pick for that, but the ownership, you were looking at 35 to 40% again for him and Vaughn's. It just feels like maybe going somewhere different if you are going to play Dormady, because if someone plays Dormady, it's going to be like Dormady, Kirkland, Vaughn's, and then they're going to have all the other popular running back value. So it's just going to be such a chalky build if you play him. So like even though Dormady probably comes in like QB3, I feel like the build that you're going to see with him is just going to be the same build that everyone plays. So I might try and avoid playing Kirkland and Vaughn's. Might be what I would try and mess around with, and then sort of rotate in some of those other guys if I was MMEing.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm really curious what Neil thinks here. I imagine you're not going to lean into the Dormady chalk this week, Neil.
I'm not going to lean into it. I mean, so we have Dormady at 28%. I'm always looking for like if I'm going to be overweight to quarterbacks, where am I going to cut under? If I'm going to be overweight to all of the like lower owned quarterbacks, where am I going to cut into? I'm not sure if I'm going to take that approach. I actually like Dormady quite a bit this week. Wade Phillips, in his interview, his Wednesdays with Wade, he said he really likes that Dormady is not afraid to throw the ball down the field. He's a pretty different quarterback from Chase Garber. Chase Garber is throwing lateral, not really throwing down the field. Dormady can really chuck it. So I do kind of like Dormady here. And I like, we went to Dormady and Justin Smith last week. Last week I said, if you're going to play Dormady, you should throw in Justin Smith because he was the one who was coming in at 1% ownership. So if you want to play the chalky quarterback, you got to find contrarian pieces to, kind of bring down the ownership of the stack. And that worked out pretty well last week. This week, we don't really have that. Justin Smith is up to 14% ownership. He's also a little bit more expensive, but I still kind of think, maybe Dormady is the quarterback that we need to open up Justin Smith. And of course, still 14% ownership is somewhat reasonable. So I do like it just because this offense is so condensed with, just the Justin Smith, Jontre Kirkland, Marquez Stevenson, Cody Latimer. Basically, that's all. Those are the only receivers you want to play from San Antonio. You can also throw John Lovett in there. But I do like how condensed this offense is. Like I said, I have some concerns about the offensive line being so banged up. You can't be that confident in how they're gonna have time to move the ball with the banged up offensive line. But I'll probably be a little bit underweight to 28%, but honestly, I'm not like hardcore fading it.
Yeah, and I think just to be a little critical of our, oh my gosh, Scott, get out of here. This is a UFL stream, not the Fantasy Points draft stream, which will be later tonight. But yeah, just being a little bit critical of our own ownership projections. Justin Smith at 14% does feel a bit high to me. I could see, maybe 8 to 10% there. I still don't really think the field's, really wants to buy into a guy like Justin Smith, who's just, he killed you the first 3 weeks of the season and then, popped off for one decent game in week 4. But I think Neil makes a decent point that Dormady could be really nice for Justin Smith. In the post-game press conference this week, Wade Phillips really complimented his arm strength, said, he brings a different dimension to the offense with the deep passing. So, sort of mirroring what Neil said there. I like mixing, Justin Smith into some of these stacks, but it's generally going to be pretty difficult to make a Dormady lineup that doesn't feel, especially if you're double stacking, that just doesn't feel chalky. So I'll probably end up mostly looking elsewhere, but you probably do want to play a little bit of Dormady here, especially against this Arlington defense that has just been a complete disaster in pretty much every regard. The backfield, John Lovett had 84% of backfield weighted opportunity last week. Really, really strong workload. My only major concern here is that Morgan Ellison did move up a spot on the depth chart, now listed as the RB2 instead of the RB3. I think he could get worked into the ground game a little bit more this week, could steal some carries, maybe even steal some stuff inside the 5 or inside the 10 from Lovett. But I do think they're pretty determined to keep Lovett as the goal line running back. And what's shocking is earlier in the week, we probably all thought Lovett was going to be massive chalk. Now we have Jacob Sailors, we have Ricky Person, some pretty strong running back value. So Lovett's only coming in, probably around 20-25% ownership. Proctor, I'll throw it over to you. How are you sort of handling John Lovett? Are you good stacking him with Quentin Dormady, all that?
I think because they're both going to be pretty highly owned, at least in the main GPPs, I'd probably avoid playing them together. In the smaller field, I think you would be fine playing them together. But yeah, looking at, I think this is probably a week where we'll see more lineups that have multiple running backs. So I think that's where you can get different, knowing that's going to be a popular construction, to just like, if you're going to lean into really chalky Dormady and the chalky wide receivers, it's like, okay, I should probably have more of a wide receiver heavy build because it just won't be as popular. So that's where I think you just can't really, throw Lovett in there too. Just because it's just going to be so, I mean, you play those 4 together from this game and you're already at 180% ownership or something. It's just insane. So I think that's where you have to really be cognizant of just how popular those pieces are going to be. And then, so I'd probably look at Lovett as someone I would play with those other quarterbacks and just, hope that he takes it away from Dormady.
Yeah.
On his own. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to note that, like Proctor said, obviously 2 running back builds are going to be a lot more popular. You'll probably see a decent amount of 3 running back builds, which were extremely rare in previous weeks. No one's really triple stacking, quarterback plus 3 pass catching options, but I imagine this week in particular, that's going to go way underutilized. So, that's not something I'm looking really to jam in, but I'll probably have a little more of that than I did in previous weeks because, again, these 2-3 running back builds are going to be so popular. Neil, any final thoughts on this backfield here?
Yeah, I mean, I like John Lovett. I think I am willing to play him with Chase Garb just because of with Quentin Dormady, just because of the involvement in the passing game. I'm sort of curious to hear Johnny's thoughts on stacking in the UFL, because that's a conversation we've had multiple times on the show. The first week we kind of came out and I was like, well, you don't really see many offenses that can support multiple receivers. And then second week we kind of completely turned around. And I was like, but on the other hand, if they do go off, and you saw last week, the lineup that got second for me, it was all San Antonio except for Jacob Sailors, and that didn't quite get there, but it almost worked out. Like they didn't get the second touchdown that I really needed, but kind of got close. So I go back and forth on do I want, and that's kind of what when I'm building lineups in SaberSim, they're giving me a lot of very, very overstacked lineups, which kind of makes me think that probably is an indication that maybe that's the way to go. So I'm curious to hear Johnny's thoughts on stacking in the UFL.
Yeah, I think the overstacks are probably the correct way to do, especially because you're seeing these wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 4 type guys that, they'll put up like an 18-point game. And that 18-point game is like massive in this league. So I feel like it's impossible just to rotate in those guys if you're just doing double stacks to the point where your lineups have like proper equity. So I think doing those triples, and even if you get like the one guy scores 5 and the other guy scores 18, that lineup is like immediately live if he's like 2% owned. So I just think the possibility of catching those huge explosion games from these wide receiver 3s and 4s on these teams it seems like it's been really important in winning these GPPs. And I think that's probably the only way to really do it, especially when you're only getting like 80 lineups into these massive GPPs. At least that's what it seems like over the last couple of weeks. So I would lean into that, especially this week with how popular running backs are going to be. I would definitely lean into it. And then overstacking for the smaller tournaments like the 2-2-2, where you can take a 0, and still win. I would totally push probably to have the overstacks.
Yeah, when I was looking through BG RE Sess lineups in the few weeks that he played in the 2-2-2 or the 3-3-3 in XFL last year, he was basically only submitting triple stacks with his quarterback. It was pretty incredible and sort of opened my eyes a little bit to that being a lot more optimal than I initially thought, especially in smaller field stuff. Neil, any final thoughts on stacking before we move on here?
Yeah, no, I think I'm in agreement. And honestly, every field we're playing here is sort of small relative to like, NBA, MLB. These are all fairly small fields. So I think it does make sense to be kind of stacking more than we're used to in NFL here.
Yeah. Yeah. Taking like a 2, 3, 4, 5 is like, does not kill you.
Right.
In these flagship GPPs like the Millie would.
Yeah. I mean, I had my best team last week finished 14th, had a 0.7 from Titus Swen. Yeah. And if Mark Thompson gets that goal line carry on the 3rd and 2 that they threw to, I think, Emmanuel Butler, I finished in the top 3, which is just absurd considering I basically had a 0 on that team. All right. Moving on to the Arlington side here. This is pretty tough in that, we have Luis Perez. He's sort of in his standard role where, it's a lot of short stuff, a lot of deep shots. And then they're bringing Lindsey Scott in for red zone work. Wide receivers, we saw Tyler Vaughn's completely fail, but I mean, we know he's still the alpha. Deontay Burnett's route share managed to tick up back to a more reasonable level last week, but he's still a tough guy to rely on. This is just a really hard passing game for me to, be excited to play, especially if we think Perez is going to be 3, 4, 5% owned. We have him at 6 right now. That seems pretty reasonable based on how he's projecting. Neil, I'll throw it over to you. What are your thoughts on this Arlington passing attack?
Yeah, it's hard because I do kind of like the pass catchers. So then I'm like, well, maybe I need to be playing some Luis Perez. I don't think I'm going to take a huge stand here, but my guess is I end up a little bit overweight to Luis Perez. So that's where I'm like, I think I'm probably going to end up a little bit underweight to Quentin Dormany, some of these chalky quarterbacks, because I do like to take shots on just the guys who are not getting ownership. And I think Luis Perez 6%, it's pretty reasonable. I still think it's a little bit light for a 4-game slate with this pass catching core. As you said, Tyler Vaughn still like pretty clearly is the guy. I think that he is their number 1 pass catcher, but I do really, I'm kind of interested in all of Sal Cannella, JP Payton, and Deontay Burnett. I thought that Burnett, even though he only ran 23 routes last week, he saw 7 targets, and like they were like late in the game, the final minute or 2 of the game, he saw like 3 or 4 targets right at the end there. He scored a touchdown last week. I kind of think that he's kind of coming along as like, okay. And he was good previously. He was good in the XFL last year. I kind of think that he might be coming into that number 1, challenging for the number 1 receiver role here with Luis Perez. So I like Deontay Burnett, who we have at sub 1% ownership right now. Will probably come in over 1%, but probably not a ton more. And Sal Cannella, another guy who was really good last year in the XFL, tied Tyler Vaughn's with for the lead in routes run with 28. And we have him at just 3% ownership, JP Payton at just 3% ownership. So I want to take shots on all 4 of them. I mean, Tyler Vaughn's pretty clearly he's going to be chalk. But then I also want to take shots. I'll be over the field, I think, on all of Sal Cannella, JP Payton, Deontay Burnett. And if I'm taking all of these receivers, I think this is a spot where maybe I will have some lineups where I do have Luis Perez with a triple stack, something where I am stacking this up quite a bit, because I've said it before, like he has games where he looks just awful. And of course, those are always the games when I play him. But he also has games occasionally where he looks like a really good, really smart quarterback. So I think I will have at least some shots on stacking up this team.
Yeah, Deontay Burnett's issue has never been target earning. He is a very, very good player. It's just, we have some questions about the play time, but he's been right around a 75% route share in 3 out of 4 games, including the last 2. But, the 47% route share that he posted in week 2, I think, just gives us a little bit of trepidation there with clicking him. JP Payton, Javonta Payton is a guy that I'm always pretty interested in when he's cheap. We've seen the ceiling. At the same time, I mean, just looking through our projections, we do have, a handful of other 4K, sub 4K guys looking like significantly better values than Payton, but you could always argue for him just based on upside. Proctor, I'm curious on your thoughts here.
Yeah, I think Perez, makes sense in tournaments, just knowing that Dormady is going to be so popular. Like the Perez with Lovett and 2 or 3 of the Arlington pass catchers is probably a really good build. It would probably project as like a really good build in terms of like equity if you ran it through a sim. So yeah, I would agree with Neil. I think that is something definitely worth playing. I mean, definitely not something you would want to do on the main lineup or single or 3 max entries, but for the flagship GPP for sure, I would want to have some. I think you could even play San Antonio defense too with a build like that.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I mean, we've seen Perez. He loves to throw pick sixes, despite being, on the whole, a pretty solid UFL quarterback. He has some brutal throws in there. All right, the backfield here, still pretty straightforward. Letty Brown and Davion Smith were right at 50-50 in terms of backfield weighted opportunity. I mean, to me, Davion Smith is still total dust with Lindsey Scott stealing so much of the red zone touchdown equity. Letty Brown, I think, you could make a case for. He's catching passes, especially if Arlington gets down in this game, could have some pretty good receiving equity. But it also just doesn't feel like you need to go there this week with so much strong running back value. Proctor, I imagine you line up.
Yeah, I would just delete these guys from my pool.
Yeah, that's what I think I'm going to do. Neil, any interest in these guys?
Yeah, and I said before, I like playing Devion Smith when he's at low ownership, but I think at this point I'm giving up on this backfield. Letty Brown, I mean, if I were to play one of them, Letty Brown, I would consider. Like, we have him at 0.4% ownership. I think I screwed up my worksheet here, but 6,100, did run 14 routes, saw 4 targets last week, along with 8 rush attempts. So it's playable, but I'm not sure that I'm actually going to get to any of these running backs.
Yeah, and if you needed another reason to fade these guys, Day Hunter is going to be up as the RB3 for this game. I mean, he probably only gets a touch or 2, but still, I mean, Letty Brown, Davion Smith need all the help they can get. So that's not great news. And then a final note, Isaiah Winstead is actually inactive for this game. Lawan Winningham is going to back up these outside wide receivers. That's really just a note for Showdown. I seriously doubt he sees more than a 25% route share here. All right, moving on to our second Saturday 7 p.m. game. This is the game pretty much everyone's going to see. From what I understand, 89% of the national coverage from, I believe, Fox is going to be on this game. It's the Birmingham Stallions at the Houston Roughnecks. Birmingham is favored by 7.5 points. Total here is 42.5. I kind of like the over here. And I saw 41.5 at one of the offshores. I placed a small bet on that. Proctor, I'm curious what you think on this betting line.
Sorry, I lost my sheet. Yeah, I think this one I would probably lean towards the over, but I just feel like I have not been confident in any of these totals, but that's probably where I would go if I had to.
Neil, any thoughts?
See, I was going to say I like the under here. I think we have the Stallions defense being probably the best defense in the league. Adrian Martinez, I mean, he showed out last game, but as you said, Jake, he's not consistent. He's somebody that can just, and he's on the better team. He's the team that's favored by quite a bit. So if he's just off, I think that this game is going to be well under. But just in general, even if he's on, I don't really think that the Roughnecks are going to have an easy time scoring. So I think I lean towards the under here. Yeah, I think that's my only take here, but I don't feel that strongly about it. That 42.5 is a reasonable line, but if I were to take one, I think I would lean toward the under.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. You could argue this Houston defense is pretty good too, especially against the run. We'll talk about that shortly. First, I wanted to note injuries on the Birmingham side. CJ Maribel is out for personal reasons. So that means it's the Ricky Person show. And then kicker Chris Blewett is also out for the second week in a row. New kicker Ramiz Ahmed is in the showdown player pool. So if you're really determined to play a Birmingham kicker, you can go with Ahmed. Houston's side is clean. So starting off with Birmingham, Adrian Martinez is your listed starter this week. It's worth noting that Skip Holtz said, for weeks 1 and 2, he wanted to rotate quarterbacks. He's, clearly asking his players for a lot of feedback because, he noted that for week 3, the quarterbacks were really clamoring to play full games. They didn't want the risk of being pulled after they throw 3 incompletions, make a mistake, whatever. I think that makes a lot of sense. He said Adrian Martinez had the best week of practice leading up to week 3, so he started Martinez. And then he said, for week 4, I started Martinez in week 3, so I'll start Matt Corral in week 4. We now have, like I said, Adrian Martinez listed as the starter. I think we can pretty safely assume this is going to be a full game for Martinez. Obviously, there is still some rotational risk. Holtz did say post-game after week 4 that he had no idea what he was going to do with quarterback rotations going forward, but he could guarantee that both quarterbacks will continue to play. So we actually don't have a projection for Matt Corral right now. I've been debating with Chris all week if we should give Corral a point or two, but realistically, I think, barring injury or truly disastrous play, Martinez is going to take every snap in this game. Proctor, I'm curious on your thoughts on Adrian Martinez and then the rest of this Birmingham passing attack.
Yeah, I really like Martinez as a play, especially if the ownership is going to come in around, like looking around the industry, like maybe you're in the 12% range based on where sort of everyone has him. And I think it's because people are a little worried about what will happen in terms of like play time. And we know that Person will probably be the highest owned player on the slate. So like playing the quarterback instead of the highest owned running back on the slate is something that I love to do. NFL, UFL, whatever. And I also think there's always that chance that a team throws a little bit more, relies on the quarterback a little bit more when you have your second string running back too. So that's probably like for my main GPP team, it will probably be Martinez is probably who I will be playing. That said, I have not fully decided where else I want to go on this team in terms of like picking a wide receiver. I mean, I guess it's Deion Kane, but that's who everyone's going to play. So that's where it gets a little kind of boring when you're playing Martinez, is like everyone's going to have a similar build.
Yeah, I mean, that's the tricky part with Martinez is that, stacking him, even double stacking him, I think all the doubles for the most part are going to be Deion Kane, Jay Sternberger. So yeah, that just makes it really tough. Kane, for what it's worth, went from about a 95% route share in week 3 to, around a 75% route share in week 4. So his playing time still isn't quite as secure as I had hoped, but even on a 70% route share, I mean, he's still by far the best target earner on the team. And I actually just noted this in Discord. Martinez is targeting wide receivers at a higher rate than Matt Corral. He's checking down less. So that's probably worth a boost for Deion Kane, even if he is only getting out there for 70% of the routes. I do love Martinez as a play, just looking at where our current projections are, where current ownership is. To me, he's much stronger for tournaments than Quentin Dormady. I do wonder if a lot of people are going to have similar thoughts in that regard. I mean, obviously no site can really project Martinez for that full workload, or at least it's very difficult to. And I do think that's probably bringing down consensus ownership projections, despite, most people we thought a few weeks ago when Martinez helped Neil to that second place finish, that he would be like 1% owned. He ended up at 4 because I think more people are willing to take those chances than maybe, projections would price in. So Neil, what do you kind of think here?
I think it's really hard to project ownership here. So that's if he comes in where we have him projected, and currently we have Martinez projected for 17% ownership, and none of the only wide receiver getting any ownership is Deion Kane at 16%. We've got Jay Sternberger at 4%, Amari Rodgers 0%, Kevin Austin and 0.5%. Like none of these guys getting any ownership. If it came in like this, like I would be thrilled with any Martinez lineup. So he would be an absolute slam dunk for me at these ownership levels. I am a little bit concerned that he's going to end up like north of 30% plus, just because we just saw him absolutely dominate 2 weeks ago. The week prior to that, when he was on the field, he looked great. So it's hard to know, like, how much are people leaning into projections around the industry where he probably is not going to be that highly owned versus people just, IKBing it and wanting to play Adrian Martinez because he has looked great. So I think I'm going to play it. I think I'm going to, just lean into and hope that people are not playing Adrian Martinez because I really like the pass catching options. As you said, Deion Kane, certainly 16%, totally reasonable for Deion Kane, but I love a 4% owned Jay Sternberger. I mean, he ran team lead 31 routes last week, saw 4 targets. He was targeted quite a bit the last game that Adrian Martinez played as well. I think he saw 6 targets 2 weeks ago with Adrian Martinez at quarterback. So I think he hasn't really quite gotten there yet. And I think this could be certainly, he has the opportunity to get there. Jake, I think you called last week that Amari Rodgers is going to be a little bit more involved, and that worked out really well. But we still have him at 0% ownership after running 24 routes last week. He was targeted 5 times, turned into 82 yards and a touchdown. He looks really good at virtually 0 ownership. And then Kevin Austin has kind of came out of nowhere. I think ran 23 routes. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but he ran 23 routes last week, saw a few targets at 3,300. I think he's in play. Probably not going to have a ton of Kevin Austin, but I might have a little bit there as well. So yeah, I do like it. I think that it is a nice spot for Adrian Martinez at 17%. I do have to voice that I have some concerns that we could end up, this could be a spot where we are off on ownership. Although, Chris has been doing his ownership reviews and I've been pretty damn impressed every week with the way the ownership has been on
I'd
the
say
site.
we have him highest for ownership around the industry. And I will say there's at least one site who's projecting like a 50-50 split on quarterback. So
yeah, I did not love hearing the coach come out and say, I don't know what I'm going to do with the quarterbacks. It was like, okay, now we can just lean into whoever the name is the starter. He's going to get 100%. Last week I said, I wasn't sure about that. It was like all the sites were projecting it as though it was Corral 100%. And I was like a little bit nervous about that. And I actually played Adrian Martinez instead of Corral, which was of course a mistake. But then I was like, okay, after the game I was okay, now I feel confident. This is just what they're doing. And then the coach comes out and says, he's not really sure. So there is a part of me that, I do have some concern that if Adrian Martinez comes out and doesn't look like Superman, because he's looked really good so far when he's been playing. But Jake, you've said he doesn't always look like he has the best reads. He comes out and throws an interception right away. Like maybe we don't have the same outcome. So I do have concerns, but at 17% ownership or, lower around the industry, I'm willing to take my shot there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my biggest fear would just be that we end up too low, and the vast majority of people who are making 1, 3, 4 lineups on their phone are just jamming in Adrian Martinez because of what he did last week. My one note on Amari Rodgers, he did see his highest route share of the season in week 4, 65%. I think that was largely because Marlon Williams wasn't active. That was a big part of why I was on him last week. Almost won me the showdown slate for that. So, with Marlon Williams back in the lineup, I do see Amari Rodgers' route share coming down a bit. That's why he's not really popping in our projections. Benjamin Victor is a little bit interesting. The route share has been all over the map, but after Deion Kane, on a targets per route run basis, he's actually the second best target earner in this offense. So, you could really make a case for almost any of these wide receivers after Deion Kane. It feels like a complete toss up to me. But Benjamin Victor, I guess, is the guy who is probably the most interesting to me. But again, all these guys are projected for between 3 and 5.5 points for us. So nothing crazy there. Any final thoughts on this Birmingham passing game before we talk about Ricky Person?
Previous preseason stud, Benjamin Victor.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to note on Martinez, like Neil said, I've noted before that I don't think he sees the field great. He struggles with reads at times, all that. But in terms of fantasy points per dropback, he's averaging 43% more fantasy points per dropback than the next closest quarterback in the UFL. I mean, the guy's just a stud for fantasy purposes as long as he's getting out on the field, largely because of just his incredible rushing equity. So really like that. All right, Ricky Person is going to be the lead back for Birmingham today. Really, my only concern with Person here is the matchup. He has everything else in his favor. Houston is tied with Birmingham, allowing a league low 2.5 yards per carry. So this is a pretty solid run defense. Head coach Curtis Johnson noted often, during training camp, preseason stuff that during the dispersal drafts, he focused heavily on their front four, which, you look at their roster, probably a mistake, but this Houston run defense is pretty strong. Outside of that, though, I mean, Ricky Person, like I've spoken about at length, he's the best all-purpose running back in the UFL. I'm honestly not even sure it's close. Fantastic receiver, elite power, great agility, great speed, really, really strong running back. He would be the best running back on the Dallas Cowboys right now, before they draft Jonathan Brooks. So yeah, and he should get plenty of positive game script. You could also argue that Martinez lowers his overall rushing equity, his touchdown equity a little bit compared to Matt Corral. But to me, he's basically tied with Jacob Sailors as the best running back play on the slate. Again, sort of the only issues being a tougher matchup and Adrian Martinez potentially stealing some rushing work here. But I mean, Larry Roundtree's total dust. This could be a game, by the way, too, where, maybe Pearson splits with Roundtree 70-30 or 80-20, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Person just never left the field. I mean, Skip Holtz loves giving his guys opportunity, and Ricky Person is, of the players on the Birmingham roster, probably the most likely to make the NFL, or right there as the most likely to make the NFL, I think. So Johnny, I'll throw it over to you. What do you think about a very chalky Ricky Person this week?
Yeah, this is that like classic NFL spot where you have like backup running back or like cheap running back, or even like middling running back cost, who's like a great value against like the best run defense. Like how many times have we seen this against like the Titans, where like if the running back fails, everyone's like, of course they failed. They played the Titans. And if they do well, everyone says, defenses don't matter. But I think like if you're from a theory perspective, I mean, this is the spot where you play Martinez and you don't play, you're under the field on Ricky Person for like a large field GPP. But as Neil mentioned, our GPPs aren't as large. So obviously he's the best running back value on the slate, but I would probably try to be cognizant of like my Martinez builds where I probably would not play them together, especially because Martinez relies so much on his legs. So that's probably where my lean would be. Obviously, if you're building a cash game team, Person would be like the first player you would put in.
Yeah. I think, the rushing's a good point. Martinez and Person will really cannibalize each other's rushing equity, which could be a significant issue. Neil, any interest in a mega chalky Ricky Person?
Yeah, obviously I have interest. I'll have some Ricky Person in my MME set. I'm probably going to be underweight too. 46% is just so massive on in a game where there's so much volatility, like the UFL, even more than the NFL. There's just so much volatility week to week. And, even though he is good, as you noted, Roughnecks, very good run defense. He's up to 7,100. We can't be 100. We can't be totally confident that he's going to get. I mean, last week, 29 opportunities for this backfield last week across Maribel and Person. Obviously, if you saw that, we would love it, but not that confident that's going to happen. And these games move really quickly. So like, that's part of the reason I lean into the volatility, is that it just, maybe I'm wrong about this, but it feels like there are just so few plays in general than the NFL. I guess I haven't looked that up, but it feels like there are fewer plays that happen than the NFL. So that just increases the volatility when there are fewer plays. So in general, I'm going to be playing less than chalky players, and this is about as chalky as we have seen. 46% going to Ricky Person. I guess we've seen it a little bit more with like Jontre Kirkland, but it's up there in terms of chalkiness. So I think I'll be a little bit underweight to the field on Ricky Person. Not too crazy. Maybe I'll have 35% instead of 46%. It's not like I'm taking a huge stand here, but I imagine I'll end up a little bit underweight, despite, as you say, he seems to have the talent. He's going to have the opportunity, but not the best spot against Houston. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, like there's no guarantee that he puts up, more than 8 fantasy points.
Yeah, that is the tough part. For what it's worth, this is by far the most valuable backfield in the UFL in terms of weighted opportunity and overall production. So, that's another point in Person's favor. Man, I mean, he's a guy that I want to lock in, but the matchup's tough, and he's going to be so chalky that I just don't think I can do it. I'll probably be a little overweight the field here because I absolutely love Ricky Person as a player. But yeah, there are some obvious issues in this play, especially from more of a game theory perspective here. So definitely like Proctor's angle, I'm leaning more into Martinez. All right, we can talk about the Houston side. Oh, I guess you could take shots on like Larry Roundtree and Showdown, but I mean, come on. Like I think there are better places to go if you need like a super thin low owned showdown play here. Like some of these ancillary Birmingham wide receivers have a way better ceiling. Okay, Houston side. I thought it was encouraging last week that Reed Sinnett actually didn't cede any snaps to backup quarterback Nolan Henderson, so you can roughly anticipate Sinnett's going to take every drop back for Houston. Not lose any red zone work to their backup rushing quarterback here. To me, what's most interesting, and I think you could argue for any of these Houston wide receivers, but what's most interesting to me is that Mark Thompson is back, officially back after he was on a pitch count, according to head coach Curtis Johnson last week. This week, Curtis Johnson says that he's going to get Mark Thompson 20 to 25 touches. Now, of course, Thompson is a workhorse running back. That makes him pretty susceptible to negative game script. And, we anticipate some serious negative game script here with Birmingham listed as a 7.5 point favorite. That said, with all the running back value that's opened up, no one's really going to want to play Mark Thompson, and 20 to 25 touches in the UFL is a pretty incredible workload. Thompson managed that in 4 different games last year. He averaged 18.6 fantasy points per game in those contests. He's also this team's, basically their entire red zone offense. I thought he looked really good last week. Is not on the injury report this week. Proctor, I'm curious on your thoughts, but to me, it seems like, Mark Thompson plus the Houston defense, because we need Houston to show up a little bit for Thompson to hit that ceiling, feels like a really good low-owned running back defense stack.
Yeah, I like that. I also like him as a bring back for Martinez teams. If Houston just happens to score early and they lean on Thompson, and Martinez gets a lot of work. But yeah, I like the defensive play paired with him would be really nice too. I think just in general, Thompson just feels like a great GPP play. Everyone's going to rely on those running backs at the top for the value chart. I mean, even looking at Darius Victor, whereas Thompson's just going to no one's really going to click him. I mean, he'll be sub 10% for sure. And if he scores, if he does get those 20 touches, I mean, it's not really, nobody else is getting that kind of workload.
Yeah. I think that's spot on. This is a really great spot from an ownership perspective relative to workload. Neil, how do you feel about Mark Thompson?
Yeah, I think is the best play on the slate. 8,700, obviously expensive, but as Johnny said, if he actually gets those 20 to 25 touches, like that is almost can't miss. Like how do you fail on 20 to 25 touches? You're either catching the ball, racking up PPR points, or you are just racking up 5 yards at a time. And how do you not get to 12 fantasy points, which is really, generally all you need in the UFL. Now, pricing is getting a little bit more restrictive as we go week to week. Like every week, it's getting a little bit tougher with the DraftKings pricing. So maybe 12 points doesn't, really get it done. But if you could lock in 14, 15 fantasy points, even at 8,700, I think you would do so. So yeah, I really like Mark Thompson, 7% ownership. Now, of course, who knows if that is really going to hold after, I keep hearing 20 to 25 touches. That is really enticing. I think everybody's going to think the same thing. Like how do you turn down 7% owned 20 to 25 touches? But hard not to love that if he is going to be anywhere under like 10% owned. He's just a slam dunk at 8,700. So I think we're all on the same page that Mark Thompson. I assume, Jake, you're also on that page of Mark Thompson just being awesome here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I wanted to come into this slate and say Ricky Person's the best play of the slate, but really hard to argue that when he's going to be 45% owned. Just looking at our running back projections, our ownership projections, Mark Thompson is just an absolute slam dunk here. And I think a lot of people are going to view it like that, but it's also hard for me to bump him up when Jacob Saylors, Ricky Person, I mean, like Johnny said, even Darius Victor, much stronger plays here. I think people will have some passing interest in Matt Colburn and Saquandre White as well. We'll talk about them a bit later. It's just going to be hard to fit Mark Thompson in. I think maybe with a little more 2 or 3 running back builds, he could get up to 10 or 12%. But I mean, there's just no way he gets, to 15%, or I mean, I think it's pretty unlikely he's even higher owned than Victor, right? Feels like a really, really good spot for Mark Thompson. But at the same time, I mean, I do think you could argue that it's easy to see a path for failure here. Birmingham's run defense really, really strong. Negative game script, quite bad for a running back like Mark Thompson, who relies, pretty heavily on positive game script, getting a ton of rushes, sort of wearing defenses down. But at 7%, I'm more than willing to take that chance.
I think that the path to failure is the coach's lying, and I think there's a real chance that he says 20 to 25 touches. He just means a lot of touches, and with the game script, it ends up being 12.
Yeah, and that's the thing with Curtis Johnson is if Skip Holtz said someone is getting 20 to 25 touches, I mean, that's a lock. That's a stone cold lock. But whenever Curtis Johnson says something, it's, you always got to take it with a grain of salt. So, there is a chance they're lying about the usage. For what it's worth, Thompson was listed as the backup running back again on the depth chart. I don't think that means anything.
No.
Even if TJ Pledger gets the start, I mean, they're still going to feed Mark Thompson. Like I've said in previous weeks, he's everything to this offense. He's the team MVP. He's the ethos of the entire offense. He means a lot to them. They're going to feed him. I would be pretty surprised if Curtis Johnson ends up lying here and TJ Pledger leads the backfield this week. That would be pretty shocking. All right, this passing attack. This is the second or third week in a row. I kind of feel the same way about Houston as I do Arlington. They sort of feel like a good game theory type play. No one's going to want to play Reed Sinnett. Even Justin Hall keeps coming in lower than the projected ownership we have for him because people just don't want to touch these Houston pass catchers. Kiki Chisholm is popping as one of the strongest values. For what it's worth, Emmanuel Butler and Cyril Grayson are sort of emerging more on the outside. Cyril Grayson especially emerging sort of a big play, explosive type threat that's eating more into Anthony Ratliff-Williams' route share than it is Chisholm's. But it is worth noting that this is, these outside wide receiver rotations are a little up in the air. I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a lot more Grayson or a lot more Butler. And like I said, I do think that comes more at the expense of Ratliff-Williams, but it could impact Chisholm a little bit. Granted, our projection for Chisholm shows him as a pretty solid value. Neil, I'm assuming you have some interest in Reed Sinnett stacks here?
I go back and forth on whether I have interest in Reed Sinnett stacks. I think I do have just at 1%. I'll probably have 3%, 4%. I'm not going to have a ton of Reed Sinnett, I don't think. But, I feel like every time I watch him, I think that he's going to be really good. Like, I'm scared that he's about to take out my team because I don't have enough of him. Just looks pretty solid. Looks like he's cool, under control, and then never really puts up the stats. So far, hasn't really done a whole lot. Hasn't thrown for more than one touchdown in a game. And it is a really tough spot against this Birmingham Stallions defense. Plus, I really like the Mark Thompson. So I don't know. It's definitely not a spot where I'm going to be playing a ton of Reed Sinnett, but I do think at 1% ownership, I'll probably end up, with a few lineups with Reed Sinnett, which would be over the field here. And of course, Justin Hall just looks like he is the guy there, leads the team in routes run once again last week, 24 routes run, saw 5 targets, caught 4 of them for 35 yards. I didn't really get it done, and I had a ton. I actually really leaned into that game, so that was a pretty disappointing Sunday in some ways that game didn't go off. I think I'm going to go, in my Reed Sinnett lineups because he's so low owned. You can just play his best receivers with him, which I think is Justin Hall and it is Kiki Chisholm. I think those are just the two that I am going to play here. I don't think I'm going to. We saw Woody Brandome come in and run 20 routes last week. I think I'm just playing Justin Hall and Kiki Chisholm, the only pass catchers from this team.
Yeah, I really don't think you need to get cute if you are stacking Reed Sinnett because he's going to be so low owned. For what it's worth, I mean, Justin Hall is one of the 7 or 8 most talented wide receivers in the league. I think that's not debatable. But his role has been a little disappointing to me. It's a lot more, short, sort of intermediate stuff. And I was hoping he'd have, a more full route tree. It seems like they really prefer to throw to these outside guys when they are going for deep targets. And also, part of the reason for our Kiki Chisholm projection, obviously, is that, he tied with Justin Hall for the team lead in target share last week. But another part of it is that you watch these games, every time they're getting inside the 20, Curtis Johnson, Reed Sinnett are talking about plays for Kiki Chisholm. Yep. It generally hasn't worked out, but they clearly want to get this guy the ball in the red zone. I think a 15 to 18 fantasy point game for Chisholm is a near guarantee at some point this year. And he's cheap enough that I definitely want to take shots on him. But of course he could always risk just giving you a 0 or a 2-3 point score. Johnny, do you have any additional thoughts on this Houston passing attack? Justin Hall, Kiki Chisholm.
Yeah. So I will say, when I account for ownership and ceiling and stackability and whatnot, the Reed, I don't know, is it Sinnett or Sinnett? I've never known.
I think it's Sinnett. right?
Okay.
But
That's how I say it, but I've never known
Yeah.
either.
Played this guy in like preseason and spring leagues and stuff, and
Yeah.
I've never known.
I think the
But
announcers say it differently, so that throws us off.
yeah, I've definitely heard it both ways. Either way, yeah, he kind of pops in terms of like how the Sims would project him for ceiling versus ownership, especially because Hall and Kiki both seem like strong ownership and ceiling plays too. And I think they pop because the other quarterbacks are so chalky this week. So I would definitely, if I was MMEing, want to have a handful of him. And he's an easy way for you to play person in the same game and not have crazy ownership. So if you want to play him, you could even play Birmingham defense, to get some ownership, get away from some of the ownership to play him on the other side. So yeah, I do like it. I wouldn't go crazy. I mean, you only have to play a handful of teams with him to get, to be over the field, but I would definitely like to have some.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. Neil, do you have anything else here before we move on?
No, I think that covers it.
Yeah. Emmanuel Butler and Cyril Grayson are two guys who I don't think I'm going to get to on main slate, but are pretty interesting for showdown. So I would keep that in mind if you're making showdown teams for this slate, which is pretty small in terms of prize pools, but I'm still going to play. All right. Our first Sunday game this week is the St. Louis Battlehawks at the DC Defenders. This is the highest total game of the week at 46.5. St. Louis is favored by 3. This game kicks off at noon Eastern time. I kind of like the over here. I also kind of like the St. Louis side. I don't think this is going to be a spot where I end up betting. Johnny, do you have any takes on this line?
I mean, I always lean towards Memphis, but I don't know. I probably wouldn't feel too great. Or wait, sorry. I always lean towards St. Louis, but wouldn't feel in love with it. I don't know. I also just like DC's been such a weird team. I just like never want to bet them.
Yeah, DC has been pretty weird. Neil, any thoughts?
I would lean St. Louis. I think that's kind of my only lean in the game. Not great defenses, but the line is pretty high. So not a game that I have a strong lean in any direction.
Yep, think that's fair. All right. Couple injury notes to get through before we can talk about the plays. On the St. Louis side, Mateo Durant has been placed on IR due to a toe injury he suffered on his first touch of week 4. So that leaves Jacob Sailors as our presumptive lead running back here. Darius Shepard is dealing with a hamstring and Hakeem Butler is dealing with a knee. They both missed Wednesday's practice and then logged a limited session on Thursday. I do expect both players to suit up without limitations, but this is worth monitoring as we wait for inactives to be released tonight. I also wouldn't be surprised if St. Louis wanted to be a little more cautious with their wide receivers because they're so deep at the position. So again, be sure to check inactives later tonight. We'll update everything as soon as those come out. On the DC side, the only injury of note is that Brandon Smith popped up with a groin injury, but he did log a full practice on Thursday. That said, I mean, I think there's a decent chance he ends up as just a healthy scratch this week. Either way, he's not going to end up with much of a projection for us. Starting with the St. Louis side here, AJ McCarron is going to be popular as he should. He'll be one of the 2 or 3 highest owned quarterbacks of the slate, but these wide receivers are really tricky. You could make an argument for not just 4 guys, but 5 guys after Blake Jackson logged his highest route share of the season in Ja'Cour Pearson's return. That was quite confusing, and it really muddies things. But yeah, Johnny, I'll throw it over to you. How do you feel about St. Louis, this passing attack, the crazy amount of playable wide receivers they have?
Yeah, God, they've been so frustrating whenever you want to just like double stack McCarron and you just want to blow your brains out when you try to pick them. Yeah, I guess you would just rotate them, and kind of hope for the best. The problem is like they're all so expensive. And then McCarron's expensive. So I do think, there's a chance that we see maybe a little lower ownership on this stack as a whole. But it's like I don't play as much McCarron week to week just because it's so difficult to figure them out. And I think at some point he'll be under-owned. I don't know when that's really going to happen, but hard to have confidence on any of them because we just never really know who they're going to lean on week to week.
Yeah, I do wonder if this could be a week where McCarron comes in a little lower than consensus projections suggest, especially if Martinez ends up getting catching some steam. Me personally, I really like Ja'Cour Pearson. I thought his week 4 usage was extremely encouraging. Almost half of his targets were screens, and pretty much all the others were obvious first reads. That's despite a 58% route share. I would imagine. And I think you could argue this a lot of different ways, but I would imagine the limited route share was only a side effect of him logging just 3 full practices over the previous 6 weeks. With another full week to get, more installs, more practice time, I wouldn't be surprised if Pearson ended up pushing for, 85-ish% route share here. That's probably the high end given the other talent they have in the slot. So he's the guy I see myself being the most overweight on relative to the field. But you could really argue this anyway. Neil, I'm curious on your takes.
Yeah, I'm with you on stacking this team up. I mean, it is expensive, as Johnny alluded to, a little bit tough, but we do have those cheap running backs. We have some cheap options throughout that we can kind of make it work. So I think you could even like triple stack this. I don't know where that Blake Jackson game came from. That's so annoying to me. After it was like, okay, good. They brought Ja'Cour Pearson back. Blake Jackson was like out of the rotation, and now he's just back in. But I think that they have 5 very viable pass catchers. It is, and you look at it, like Ja'Cour Pearson only ran 28 routes last week. That would have led like half the teams in the league in terms of route participation, just in terms of raw routes run data. 28 routes run would be there. Blake Jackson at 34, like those pale in comparison to Marcel Aitman at 46 and Akeem Butler at 45. But just compared to other teams, these guys are running so many routes. They're getting a reasonable number of targets. I mean, Blake Jackson only saw 3 targets last week. He has not really been targeted a ton. So if you're going to cut somebody out, I guess you could consider cutting him out. But I actually think that he's one that, he's running enough routes, and he's the one that kind of allows you to play the stack because he's only 5,500 and all the rest of the stack is so expensive. And he's coming in at virtually 0 ownership. I like the ownership on all of these receivers. I mean, we have Aitman at just 9%. Love that. Darius Shepard at 15%. That's pretty good. Hakeem Butler, 11%. Love that. Ja'Cour Pearson, 17%. And then Blake Jackson we have at 0%. So all of these receivers really low owned. The hard thing is it's going to be hard to, I don't know if it would even be possible. I haven't tried to do this, but like to even double stack AJ McCarron and then throw in a Mark Thompson, who I also said I love. Like, I don't even know if that is possible. That's certainly going to be tough
probably not.
Do.
I was just messing with it while you were
really.
Yeah, unless you want to play one of the cheaper wide receiver. Like, if
could you do it?
Blake
Did you
Jackson,
try Blake Jackson? Okay,
you can do it with him. Yeah,
I'd consider that build a Blake Jackson double stack with Mark Thompson,
especially if you want to bring it back with Vincent Smith, because he's only like 30.
Okay, yeah, that could work.
Vincent Smith is going to be a pretty good way to save on salary if you do end up, double or triple stacking McCarron. For what it's worth, I don't think I'm going to end up with any Blake Jackson lineups on my initial run. But if after Saturday night I'm looking at McCarron lineups that have a 0 or have some really bad scores, he seems like a pretty decent late swap option. And he's really popping in Neil's, what is it? Routes run per yard. Yeah,
I want to say one thing about that. Okay. Justin Smith, Kelvin Harmon, they don't show up on your list. They would have showed up before last week. So it's one of those stats. It's like nobody's ever going to look good. Like, they don't have good games, because as soon as you have a good game, you're no longer going to be on that list most likely. So it's in a sport like UFL. I use that stat jokingly. Obviously, it's not actually a stat that I'm trying to seek out.
Reminds me of the air yards by low model.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, that is kind of what it is, right? Like, it's like the guys that you're like, they haven't done it yet, but like in the UFL, you never know when it's like suddenly, oh, he's targeting that guy now. So, it's kind of a joke stat, but also there's some truth to it.
Yeah, no, I definitely line up with that. Any final thoughts on these St. Louis pass catching options? I think we covered everything here. All right. Jacob Sailors is going to be your lead running back this week. He handled 80% of backfield weighted opportunity last week. Mateo Durant only played 4 snaps. So if you just sort of remove those snaps from the equation, Jacob Sailors' snap share jumps up to 73%. I mean, we could see a little more Wayne Gallman than initially anticipated, but I think last week sort of gave away what the plan here is without Mateo Durant. And Sailors is looking at sort of a, not debatable top 3 workload in the UFL. It makes him a really strong play. He's got a better matchup than Ricky Person, and he's, likely to be more efficient because of how much, I've talked at length, how much St. Louis spreads the field. I mean, they're getting a ton of 5 and 6 man fronts. Defenses are playing St. Louis like defenses play 2023 USC, where they just can't stack the box at all. So Sailor's just getting these huge rushing lanes. Proctor, any thoughts on the Jacob Sailors chalk? So I imagine, we have it projected. He'll be right there with Ricky Person as the most popular play of the slate, at least a running back.
Yeah, it looks like he should probably come in just behind him. I think the only the knock you could put on him is that we have seen Gallman get goal line carries, and maybe they'll keep doing that. This has also probably been the weirdest team in terms of just running backs from week to week. So there's a little bit of uncertainty there. That said, it's it feels like we finally have a running back play with St. Louis that we can rely on. So I will probably lean into that. But if you want to tell yourself a story, they are a team that throws. They are a team that's been a little weird at running back, and Gallman has gotten goal line carries, but I would be fine with him.
Yeah, we've seen throughout the history of St. Louis, they really have no problem giving, a guy like Sailors an entire drive. And then after, play number 9, when they're inside the 10, they just sub him out for Wayne Gallman because he's tired. So yeah, he could risk losing some red zone work to Wayne Gallman. This team also throws a ton in the red zone. So, those would be the two ways that Sailors fails. But, his pass game workload is also really strong. 5 targets last week. McCarron does love to check it down. So Proctor, I would imagine you're okay with stacking Sailors with McCarron, especially because, McCarron doubles, at least talking, 2 wide receivers, are going to be relatively low owned compared to previous weeks.
I'd be fine with it. But I would probably lean on this week with the way running back is. I'm probably going to just shy away from most QB-RB pairings just because we have so many viable running backs.
Yeah.
But I think if I had to pick one QB-RB that I would be most comfortable with, it's probably McCarron and Sailors.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Neil, any thoughts on the super chalky Jacob Sailors?
Yeah, I feel like the analysis for me is really pretty similar to Ricky Person, where it's I obviously really like it. It's a great spot for him. He is 7,300 and 42% ownership, so I'm probably going to be a little bit underweight. Of course, the guy I'm going to be overweight to, Mark Thompson, is 8,700. So I guess the price isn't really the deal for me there as much as the ownership, and there is room to fail even with a pretty healthy general workload at 7,300. Doesn't score a touchdown, there's a good chance that he's not really paying off that price tag in a way you really want. So yeah, I imagine I'm going to have a lot of Jacob Sailors. I'll probably be underweight to 42% if that's where the field comes in.
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to end up in a similar spot. Wayne Gallman is super gross for Showdown, but I think he'll probably go a little underowned. So I'd figure I'd throw that out there. Yeah. All right. We can move on to the DC side here. Jordan Teamu, I noted going into week 4 that I was hopeful he'd run a ton, only 4 carries in week 4. At the same time, it does still seem like this QB run game has been a big priority. To me, he's just going to be a hard guy to fit in. I don't want to be too underweight the field on McCarron or Dormady. I want to play a little bit of Perez, and I really want to play Martinez. I feel very neutral about Jordan Teamu. It feels like the 3rd or 4th week I've said that. Neil, I'll throw it over to you. How do you feel about Jordan Teamu and these stacking options? Because we do have Kelvin Harmon and Vincent Smith both projecting as pretty solid values here.
I think I'm largely out on Jordan Teamu, and he's somebody that as I said, I played 40% a few weeks ago when the field was not playing any, and I'm definitely nervous about it, and maybe I'll have a couple of shares, but I'm going to be certainly underweight to Jordan Teamu. Nervous because they are playing the Battlehawks. He might just need to be chucking it all game to try and keep up with the Battlehawks, and he has had games in the past where he has really gone off. So it makes me a little bit nervous, but I do think that this is a spot where I'm going to come in underweight too. We have Teamu at 13%. And part of it is just I don't love the stacking options. We talk about, as I said, Ja'Cour Pearson ran 28 routes last week. That would have led this team by 6. Kelvin Harmon led the team with 22 routes run last week. It's just such a gross rotation. They're not condensed the way other teams are, and they're just not, throwing as much as other teams are. So I think, to me, now that he's up to 13% ownership and with some other spots that I really like, I feel like I'm going to be largely out on Jordan Ta'amu. Maybe I'll have a couple shares, but yeah, this is going to be, for the most part, a fade spot for me. I'll probably have some shares to Kelvin Harmon, but now that he's up to 19%, like probably going to be underweight to Kelvin Harmon. Vincent Smith, I think 11%, 3,500 seems pretty reasonable. I think I'll probably be close to the field there.
Yeah, he's right there as our top wide receiver value of the week. Like really jumped out in terms of route share and target share last week. I believe was second on the team in both, right behind Harmon. So, it's kind of similar to Ja'Cour Pearson, where I would imagine Vincent, like the only obstacle to Vincent Smith being involved in week 3 was just a lack of practice time. He was injured for part of camp, missed the first few weeks of the season. So he's a guy that's pretty interesting, and I think we could see emerge a little bit more as the season goes on. Proctor, what are your thoughts on this DC passing attack?
Yeah, and especially on Smith, like normally he's a guy you would see at really high ownership because he lets you make a lot work. But with the running back value, I don't think he will. So I think he'll be like sub 10% or so. And he lets you play those, the Mark Thompsons and the AJ McCarrons of the world to really get yourself away from the condensed ownership. So that's probably why I like him the most. Obviously, the 3,500 wide receiver is always the risk in every football league, but he lets you do a lot with ownership. So I like him a lot. Ta'amu, he hasn't been very good. And so I probably just won't play him. I mean, I guess we're going to see one of these weeks where he has like 2 rushing TDs or whatever, but I'm not going to play him to keep trying to get that.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I still want to play a little bit of Ta'amu. I mean, we know he has, a ceiling in there, and I would imagine based on the way we're talking about him that maybe 13% ownership we haven't projected for is a little too high. But yeah, it is a bit of a tougher sell this week. The backfield, quite interesting here. Zaquandre White actually emerged pretty heavily here, 57% snap share, 54% route share. Cameron Harris still led the backfield in weighted opportunity, but Cameron Harris has also been bottom 5 in basically every running back stat that matters to me. So I wouldn't be surprised if the team was trying to get away from him. This has been DC's kind of right there with St. Louis in terms of their running back rotations. It has been a little weird. I think it's clear they wanted Cameron Harris to be the guy, and it's just not looking like he is. Johnny, do you have any interest in Zaquandre White as sort of a middling running back value with some potential upside if he can, earn a bell cow roll out of nowhere?
He probably won't make it into my builds just because I think I'll focus on the really strong values and Mark Thompson. But I could see the argument for it, especially because he does have a ceiling to emerge for more. But I'm not sure he'll make my builds.
Neil, any thoughts on Zaquandre?
Yeah, I'll be playing some Zaquandre. I think I play a lot more lineups than Johnny does. I might even max it out this week, so easier for me to play some Zaquandre White. But yeah, certainly. And to be honest, the 13% ownership, I saw that and I was like, man, I don't love that. We have him at 13%. That feels, high or, like a reasonable amount to me. But I think he was also just signed like midweek, the week prior to the last game. So I do think they worked him in already when I wasn't really expecting them to last week. And now I am thinking, like you said, like Cameron Harris has just been so inefficient. It would be smart of the defenders to try to keep the ball on the ground early, at least like try to slow the game down to try and stay in this one. So I like him at 5,500, 13%. I was hoping for less than 13% ownership, but I'm willing to play 13%. I think I might come in a little bit higher than the field on Zaquandre, but not going crazy there because as we've said several times, there are actually running backs that we want to play now. Like some running backs have emerged, so hard to really lean into it. Like it would have been if this had been last week before we saw some running backs really separate themselves. But I still think I'm probably going to be 13%, maybe even a little bit higher on Zaquandre.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if we ended up adjusting Zaquandre down a few points in terms of ownership. But there is a pretty compelling narrative argument for him. He was cut by DC during camp. He was only with the team for 4 or 5 days, picked up again on April 16th, which was 10 days ago, and immediately led the backfield in snap share. So, something like that, it seems like it could pretty easily lead into a game where he's, earning 75% of backfield weighted opportunity. At the same time, He is a little skinny. They may still want to give Cameron Harris the goal line work. Teamu can steal goal line carries. So, it's a tough spot where you could be right on the narrative. Get Zaquandre White at 8, 10, 12%. And he gets 75% of backfield weighted opportunity, but the backfield just hasn't been worth much. And Cameron Harris or Teamu could steal those touchdowns. So I think you want a little bit if you're making multiple teams, but he is a tough sell in some regards. Okay, I think we covered everything for DC, unless you guys have anything else here.
No.
All right. Final game this week kicks off Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. It's the Michigan Panthers at the Memphis Showboats. I've kind of seen this line all over the place, depending on where you look. So be sure to shop. I've seen a pick 'em on some offshores, but DraftKings has it listed Michigan as a 1.5 point underdog. Total here is only 40 points. I kind of like the over here, although, I would not be surprised if both of these offenses just really failed to show up. And we're also waiting on some injury info on Cookus, which I will note shortly. But Johnny, do you see any value on this betting line?
I would probably lean the Memphis side. That's probably really all I would be interested in. With Cookus beat up, but I think he's going to play. It just seems like he's always beat up. And then Etling, he's probably not a big downgrade on Perry, but he does stink. So did Perry. So that's probably where I would lean, is just the Memphis side, maybe the under, just everybody being beat up in this game. But it's already so low that I probably wouldn't actually bet the under. I don't know. This is a gross one, but I'll take Memphis 1.5.
Neil, any thoughts on the line?
I feel like I feel very similar. I don't have any strong leans here. I think Memphis probably is the best if you're going to take anything, but I don't feel good at this game is just so gross overall to me. I don't have any strong leans on this one.
Yeah, I totally understand that. All right, a few injury notes to get through, so just bear with me here. On the Michigan side, EJ Perry is on IR after a week 4 leg injury, which leaves Danny Etling as the Michigan Panthers starting quarterback. John Hightower is dealing with an ankle, and he still has not practiced. I seriously doubt he plays this week. Jordan Sewell was cut, by the way, so that's an important note that we will talk about later. And then Marcus Sims is dealing with a back and a shoulder injury. I do believe the shoulder injury is a new designation for him. He logged a limited session Wednesday and then did not practice on Thursday. So I do think Marcus Sims plays. He's basically hasn't practiced all year and has played and looked fine. But this is worth monitoring. A little weird that he was limited Wednesday, didn't practice yesterday. So we could see Marcus Sims be rolled out, but that would be pretty surprising. On the Memphis side, Vinny Papali's dealing with a shoulder, and Dawood Davis is dealing with a hamstring. Both of those injuries were suffered in garbage time last week. They looked pretty minor for what it's worth. Dawood Davis did not come back into the game. Vinny Papali did. Papali missed about a drive and a half. I think Davis got hurt the 5 or 6 minute mark of the fourth quarter, didn't come back in. Both players have only logged limited practices this week, but for what it's worth, Memphis has been generally conservative with their injury reporting. A lot of guys who have been completely healthy are still getting in limited practices. And then we have Case Cookus. He's dealing with an elbow and a shoulder injury. He suffered this injury with about 20 minutes left in the Showboats week 4 loss. He did not return to the game, but he was seen on the sideline with his helmet on, talking to head coach John DiFilippo and participating in play calling. So I'm pretty unsure of the severity here now that he's been limited in practice all week, but he is the kind of guy, like Johnny said, who's just always beat up. I mean, he doesn't protect himself at all, loves taking sacks, hates sliding. So I think Cookus is a warrior and he'll get out there for this week, but it is worth monitoring. We could see Trey Williams get the start. All right, we can start out with the Michigan Panthers side here. Obviously we have a quarterback change, but from a projection standpoint, this really doesn't change much for us. To me, EJ Perry and Danny Etling are very similar quarterbacks, both very erratic passers who are prone to scrambling. They really want to use their legs. I'm not sure either of them, reads the field particularly well, so they are a little eager to scramble. Wide receivers for Michigan feels very straightforward, assuming Marcus Sims plays, which again, we think he does. It's going to be him. It's going to be Trey Quinn. And then we also saw Cioce Mariner emerge. Went from a 28% route share in week 3, his first game, where he was praised by head coach Mike Nolan afterwards, to a 68% route share in week 4. The team then proceeded to cut outside wide receiver Jordan Sewell. So I think the team really likes Mariner, and they want him out there for a full-time route share, and that makes him a pretty tempting play to me at, I think he's around 3,500. Neil, I'll throw it over to you. How are you viewing Danny Etling, this Michigan Panthers passing attack for this slate?
Yeah, I think I have some interest here. I mean, he's 7,800. We haven't really seen what we have in him too much. He hasn't had too many opportunities. So I think that he maybe one of those spots where the backup quarterback comes in and he could be an upgrade for all we know. Maybe not. We just don't know. And, kind of want to lean into those spots. We do have him at 18% ownership. So that is the one thing that I don't like about Danny Etling is I don't want to lean into ownership. But this is a team that has given up 97 points on the year. This Memphis Showboats defense, which is the second most in the UFL. So it is, a good spot here for the Panthers. 7,800, the price is right. We do have a few guys that are running significant routes. So yeah, I think I'm going to play some Danny Etling. I don't know that I'm going to be overweight to the 18%. I think I'll probably be pretty close to the field if he really does come in at 18%. But I like that he's cheap. He's in a great matchup. And we have a few wide receivers in, Marcus Sims, 33 routes run last week, 5 targets. Trey Quinn saw 6 targets on 30 routes run. Devin Gray, 27 routes run, 4 targets. And then I do think Mariner coming on at 3,400 is one of the better value options on the slate. So like some of the receiving options here. And I think 18%, seems reasonable. I'm probably not going to be too far off that. I don't think I'm going to be overweight to 18%, but wouldn't be surprised to see myself right around there.
Yeah, the nice thing with Etling is he is really cheap. He's only 7,800, so that's pretty nice. Yeah, I'm not sure where his ownership's going to end up. I think we'll have to sort of see where the industry falls, and maybe rerun later tonight or Saturday morning. But yeah, for what it's worth, this Memphis defense is a really great matchup for opposing passers, allowing the most passing yards per game, the second most yards per pass attempt, and as Neil noted, they're giving up a ton of points. So they have been pretty bad. Johnny, I'll throw it over to you. What do you think about Danny Etling and these Panthers wide receivers?
Yeah, I think ownership wise, I would bet that he comes in like sub 10%. Just considering, unless unless Te'amu really doesn't have any ownership. I think with the running back value, I don't think you really need to play him. So unless people are willing to leave salary on the board, I think people won't click him as often. Danny Etling is an NFL preseason like absolute hero from back in the day. He has a few massive touchdown runs. And he was always hilarious because he didn't run in college. Like he was not really a runner. But then when he came into the NFL and he got preseason work, he would just run the shit out of the ball. He has a 90-yard touchdown and a 50-yard touchdown in the preseason. They were both like absolutely hilarious.
90-yard rushing touchdown?
Yeah.
Wow.
So he's an athlete. He is like an undercover athlete. He ran like a 4.7, something like that, and had some pretty decent burst scores and stuff, for a goofy looking white guy. So he's definitely an interesting player because of what we've seen him do in the past. Like when he was out there in the preseason, he would just like take off with like no regard for his health or safety. So there's definitely some serious ceiling for him in terms of running if they let him do it. So that's where I have some interest in him. And I think people probably won't really project him for the running because it's not like if you go through college stats or whatever, they're not really there. But as Jake said, when he gets out of the pocket, he'll just take off. You will definitely have to leave salary if you play him and stack him with a wide receiver, which makes it uncomfortable, which is why I think the ownership probably won't be there for him. So yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Can I throw an idea out there?
Oh yeah, go for it.
I've always been a stack the quarterback no matter what. Like it's something that Alex Baker always talked about. Like he just always wants to stack, lean into getting that upside. These tournaments are so small that I'm like more and more I'm considering like, do you play him with 3 Battlehawks? Because AJ McCarron is 10,900.
Yep.
Lean into that Battlehawks offense. Maybe that's the way you can play, several Battlehawks along with a Mark Thompson or something like that. Just sort of an idea that I'm like toying with, not something I've ever done. I've always been a stack the quarterback guy, but maybe at 7,800 we can consider it.
Yeah, there's actually, so like in the NFL, we had talked previously. I had talked with Scott on some streams and stuff about how like the guys like Anthony Richardson, where you would play him, or some of the previous years where you had guys who legit just ran, you would play them and then stack like a different game. And they would sim really well. The problem was it's just so hard to do them with like lineup optimizers to like build a secondary stack and whatnot. So if you're building by hand and you do that, like you use Etling and then you stack other games, I'm sure it would have really, really good equity.
Interesting
in terms of ownership and build structure. You just have to do it by hand, which is what's annoying.
Of course, it's what won last week too. The unstacked quarterback.
Yep.
With three running backs in that one.
Yeah. That was quite the lineup.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if you're gonna play an unstacked quarterback, I mean, the only 2 I would really consider are Etling and Martinez, and I think Martinez has shown a better passing ceiling than I think what Etling's probably capable of here. So yeah, I definitely like Etling. I think he's a guy that I'll probably end up a little overweight on, assuming he comes in around 10 or 12%. All right, any other thoughts on this passing attack before we talk Panthers running backs real quick? Nope. All right. So if you just looked at raw usage last week, you would assume Matt Colburn is taking over the backfield. He finished with a 70% snap share, led all running backs with a 66% route share, and claimed 66% of backfield opportunity. Those are obviously very strong, usage numbers overall. But the problem was that Michigan played from behind by either 8 points or more on 66% of their offensive snaps last week. We have to remember that in week 3, they only played from behind by 8 points or more on 7% of their offensive snaps. And Wes Hills logged the second best workload of any running back, according to weighted opportunity of the season. So to me, I think there will probably be some people who assume, Colburn's the emerging guy, and maybe you could argue that. I mean, Colburn's looked solid, but assuming Michigan keeps this game close, I think they'll probably lean more into Wes Hills. Of course, if Memphis gets out to a big lead, then it's just going to be the Colburn show. Johnny, do you have any interest in either of these running backs? I mean, to me, Colburn's more of a floor and median play. I just don't see much ceiling here.
Yeah, it's probably another one that won't make my builds. Maybe if you're MMEing and you want to, play a little bit of him or Hills, maybe with Michigan defense. I don't know. These uncertain backfields just feel like they're such a trap this week when you have like 4 or 5 spots where you have a really good running back play. And I just have a hard time like going into and, being that there's only 4 games in this league, to have like 7 running backs in my pool, I feel like on a good running back week is just wrong. So I'll probably delete Colburn and Hills from my pool.
Yeah, I think I'm going to end up in the same spot. For what it's worth, I believe this is the featured showdown slate. Hills is going to go under-owned, I think, pretty significantly on this showdown. So I like him a lot there. Neil, any thoughts on this backfield?
You've really activated my galaxy brain. I had not thought at all about Wes Hills, and now I'm thinking about maybe I'll have a couple shares of Wes Hills. I really like that analysis, Jake, of maybe if the game script is a little bit different, we do see a different. And we've talked about early on, we were thinking Wes Hills might be a guy that could threaten the 100-yard bonus. Maybe if they do take a lead, they will, and we've got him at 0.5% ownership. I think. I'm debating. I was not going to plan on having any Wes Hills in my lineups, but if I do max it out, maybe I'll have 3%. Maybe I will. I'll lean in and have or 5% Wes Hills, something like that. I'm willing to take those kind of gambles in UFL. So I like the thought process there. You may have convinced me to take a few shots, and I'll blame you if it goes south, and I won't give you any credit if it goes well for me.
That sounds good. That's very brave of you.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, I do view him a little similarly to like a guy like Mark Thompson, where I would push for a little more defense in West Hills builds. I think Michigan defense plus West Hills. I mean, Michigan defense is going to be super popular, but no one's going to play Hills, and for the reasons we just outlined. All right, I think that just about covers everything on the Michigan side. We can now move on to our final team of the week, which would be Memphis. We still don't exactly know how this quarterback situation is going to shake out. Again, we think Cookus is going to play. I also wouldn't be surprised if he was active but listed as the backup. To me, it just kind of feels like an avoid spot. At the same time, though, I mean, I do still have a good amount of interest in these Memphis wide receivers. Dawood Davis hasn't posted a good score over the last couple weeks, but again, Case Cookus has missed over 2 quarters in the last 2 games. And Dawood is, he does have that alpha wide receiver 1 profile where every single quote from the coaches from Case Cookus is like, oh yeah, he's our guy. He's involved at every area of the field. He's still right there for the league lead in air yards. Yeah, I'll throw it over to Johnny here. Cookus just feels a bit too risky, I would imagine, for this slate. But I mean, you could argue it if he's only going to be 2 or 3% owned. And we know he's got, a decent rushing floor. Memphis is going to run a ton of plays. They're going to pass a lot. But really, to me, I think I'm just looking at these wide receivers as one-offs. What do you think, Proctor?
Yeah, I think with the reporting in these leagues, I have a hard time with an uncertain quarterback who plays the last game of the slate. So I probably would avoid it unless we got some more information, tomorrow morning or something like that. But probably out. I think there's, the other quarterback options are good enough, and we have some low-owned, interesting QB spots that I don't think you need to go with Cookus. I mean, at least Troy Williams is cheaper, so it would be an easy swap if you really wanted to be on him. But I think that's probably somewhere where I will not go. But I do think, like you said, getting your exposure to Cookus by playing the wide receivers instead, I think, is a good avenue, and I would be fine with that. I think they're, I'm not going to jam any of these guys in, but I think they're all guys that I would rotate through my builds. So yeah, I'd be on board with that.
Yeah, none of these Memphis wide receivers are projecting particularly well, but again, I've always really liked Dawood, and Surratt has really strong touchdown equity and overall has been really involved, especially last week. For what it's worth, if Troy Williams ends up as the starter, he would be a pretty interesting play, at least on the basis that, Memphis runs a lot of plays, they throw a lot, and he can run. He's a pretty good athlete. He's never been a super eager runner, but, he's a much stronger athlete than Case Cookus. And I'd imagine they'd probably call more designed runs for him than they would someone like Case Cookus. Neil, how do you feel about the Memphis Showboats passing attack this week?
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to land on any Cookus. I'm tempted by the 3.3% ownership. This is a team that has, thrown 40 times a couple times this year. So there are reasons to think that I, might have a little bit of interest. But I think that there is a pretty good chance he doesn't end up in my player pool. Obviously, as you said, Michigan Panthers defense, a quarterback who loves taking sacks, and then a really tough defensive line, man, that feels like a spot where he's just going to die even if he does get out there. So I'm somewhat tempted by the ownership, but I think I don't end up with any Case Cookus. But I think you're exactly right. You can still play some of these receivers. Dawood Davis certainly looks like the best. Of course, he is 17% ownership is not nothing. We're not getting quite the ownership discount I was hoping for. Sage Surratt, 6 targets last week. They both those guys had 22 routes run. So again, relative to the rest of the league, not running a ton of routes, but they both led the team in routes run. My guy, Jonathan Adams, who I've been on every single week, really every week I'm pushing up the pressure, pushing up the heat, really going to play into it. He's going to get there eventually. He ended up not running as many routes last week, just really not involved at all. So kind of falling off. So this is the week that Jonathan Adams is going to go off, now that I think that I'm no longer going to be pushing that. I mean, at 1%, maybe I'll have a couple shares, so maybe I still will be overweight to the field. But yeah, I think you're probably safe just going to Dawood Davis, Sage Surratt, Vinny Papali. As you said, he's hurt, right, Jake? It's unclear if he's going to play.
Yeah, he's dealing with a shoulder issue. I mean, I do think both. He came back into the game after he suffered that shoulder injury, so I think he's more likely to play than Dawood. I think they both play after limited practices. He's run really good on touchdowns overall. I mean, he's right there with Surratt for the league lead in red zone targets, but he's converted like half of them into touchdowns, which just isn't that sustainable. So that's why he's not projecting particularly well for us. Jonathan Adams does feel like a pretty good buy low spot, but I think you could also just argue that he's like fancy Kiki Chisholm, like the more expensive version of, big outside guy who's getting, a good amount of red zone work and, should be a featured guy on the offense. I'm sure they're calling lots of plays for him, but just can't really separate, isn't quite there. Tough pill to swallow at 7,700, but I think if you're making a lot of teams, you could justify it. Any other thoughts on these wide receivers before we talk about this backfield really quick?
One thing I was just looking at, I think is interesting. If you want to sort of in the back of your mind consider Troy Williams, you could build some teams with Danny Etling and like the wide receivers from this game, and then if Case Cookis is inactive, you can swap off of Etling to Troy Williams.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, we should get news on whether or not Cookis will be active tonight, but we could always get something that develops after lock in terms of, maybe Case Cookis isn't in uniform despite being listed on the active roster.
Yeah, it's just a way that like you could end up with a 0.5% owned quarterback without having to change anything else because Etling is just a 1-for-1 swap.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And even if we do get news that Cookis is ruled out tonight, I mean, I can't imagine that Troy Williams would push for more than 4, 5, 6% ownership. I mean, I think people are really scared away of this Memphis offense after the way they've looked the last few weeks. All right, this backfield is once again led by Darius Victor. He finally looked good, over 5 yards per carry last week. That said, it was against a pretty beat up St. Louis run defense. The fact that we can pretty safely project him for about 80% of snaps. He had 96% of backfield weighted opportunity last week. That's really nice. For what it's worth, Cyrus Habibi Lokio was stealing a good amount of third down reps. So that's a little concerning for Victor's pass catching equity, but at the same time, I mean, assuming Cookis is the starter, he should still get plenty of checkdowns. To me, though, I mean, he's pretty clearly in a tier below some of the other running backs we've discussed. Mark Thompson, obviously Jacob Sailors, Ricky Person. Victor's projecting pretty well, but I don't know. I just have a tough time pulling the trigger on him when there are such strong running back options, and he's going to catch, probably 15% ownership this week. Proctor, what are your thoughts on Darius Victor?
Yeah, he's probably a guy I won't really lean into, but I think he is interesting because he, even if he's coming in around, 15, maybe upwards of 20%, he's significantly lower owned than all these guys who are like in the same price range. So he moves your build significantly versus like Lovett, Sailors in Person, but he's still not a guy I'm going to lean into. But I would prefer him to like Colborn or White, just because I can play him over those other guys who are going to be twice as owned.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, especially people hand building. I think it's just going to be automatic that they choose Sailors or Person, and they won't really give much thought to a guy like Darius Victor. So he may come in, a little lower than what we have current ownership at. Neil, any thoughts on this backfield here?
I mean, at the very least, he is a great late swap option. Like if you are not doing well, you can swap onto him on the Sunday slate if you have Jacob Sailors in your lineup. Pretty easy way to lose a little ownership, maybe give yourself more of a shot. But yeah, I think that he is certainly in play. And this is, man, I got this spot so wrong last week. I leaned hard into, I got really lucky getting second last week because I leaned hard into Titus Wen. He had been getting more work and they named him as a starter, or is listed as a starter on the depth chart last week. So I was all over Titus, but I wish I had heeded your warning, Jake, because you pointed out that Darius Victor was still a team captain. They still really loved him. And I leaned into Titus when that did not go well at all. It's Darius Victor's backfield like 100% last week. I like him at 16% projected ownership. I'm probably not going to go crazy here, but maybe I might have 20%, a little bit over the field, and maybe more depending on how things go for the first couple games. He could be a big time late swap on Sunday.
Yeah, I really like that late swap call. For what it's worth, Michigan is right there with Houston and Birmingham as the league's toughest run defense. And, a guy like Victor, who's just been so inefficient at times, especially in tougher matchups, that does worry me a bit. But yeah, I mean, as a late swap option off of a guy like Jacob Sailors, I think that makes a ton of sense. Johnny, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, and even more, you could swap to him and to Showboats defense off of your Panthers defense.
Yeah,
just make that 2 for 2.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a good call. I just wanted to talk about late swap really quick. I mean, obviously we've covered a lot of the swaps from this game, but just hammering again that like nobody is doing this. Like I'm going through the lineups in the top 100 before and after the final game of the slate. Nobody is late swapping. Even among some of the best players, the guys who are max entering, it seems like, Justin Freeman is doing a ton of late swap and then pretty much everyone else isn't doing anything. It's really blowing my mind. Any final thoughts on late swap, guys?
It's probably not worth their time, those guys.
Yeah. I think that's fair with so many other sports going on. Week 3, especially, we had the Masters. So makes a lot of sense, which, it means for the viewers of this show, the people who are really committed to submitting the best spring football lineups, it is just a massive, massive edge, way bigger than the projection edge, I think, is the late swap edge. All right, Proctor, do you want to tell the people where they can find you before we get out of here?
You'll find me back here for the NFL season every Sunday morning, and then on Twitter it's at JohnnyP135DFS. You guys can find me in Discord posting videos of Danny Etling's 90-yard touchdown runs, and then that's that.
Awesome, man. Neil, I realized that we're 5 weeks in and I've never given you a chance to shout out your stuff. So you've got a pretty great show that some of our viewers might not know about. Why don't you let the people know?
Oh, that is true. I do a weekly podcast on typically Wednesday nights record, and I record it live. And it's I have rotating guests, so it's just kind of higher level DFS talk in general. You may, if you know me, you might know I had previously I had a podcast called High Stakes. It's similar in that I rotate. I try to bring on like high level guests who can have high level conversations about DFS, gambling, whatever. And we record it live typically on Wednesday nights, usually in the evening. It varies a little bit week to week, but I'm really excited to have guy BP Colonia on next week. Really, really high level, one of the best DFS players in the world. Really excited about that. I have my own YouTube channel. You can find it. You can find me at PlayerQDFS on Twitter. I posted yesterday a kind of explanation of how Pick 6 works, which not everybody has it in their states, but I think it's one of the more misunderstood formats. But I think it is really cool. So yeah, you can find me on Twitter at PlayerQDFS. You can find in my pinned tweet. You can find my YouTube page. I have stuff there. What's going on for the draft tonight, Jake? Are you doing any draft coverage? What's going on there?
Yeah, I will not be doing any draft coverage because I have focused every bit of my brain on UFL. I actually got killed on round 1 betting because I did not listen to Fantasy Points betting expert Tom Broly on draft picks. Instead I did my own thing and got absolutely killed. So hoping to make all that back in UFL, but for you guys who do want draft coverage, you can get 2024 NFL Draft live analysis over at the Fantasy Points YouTube channel. I think pretty much the whole crew is going to be there. Joe Dolan, Scott Barrett, Brett Whitefield, a ton of the guys from Fantasy Points, guys who have actually put a ton of effort into researching the NFL Draft, unlike myself. So, if you're interested in any live draft coverage, I believe it's the second and third rounds happen tonight, definitely check out the Fantasy Points YouTube channel tonight. All right, guys. Well, that does it for the week 5 edition of the Fantasy Points UFL breakdown. Very grateful that Johnny Proctor was able to join us despite having a 1.5-year-old baby. He's limited on time, but he still finds a way to grind spring football, which we can always appreciate. So thank you so much to everyone for tuning in, and I will see you guys at the top of the leaderboard.